I dropped to the floor, mid-asthma attack, clawing at the carpet as my lungs slammed shut. My little sister held my inhaler just out of reach, smirking like she was watching some private performance. "Pathetic," she whispered. Behind her, my parents didn't move a muscle. That was the moment I realized you could literally be suffocating in front of your family, and they'd call it being dramatic. Guys, our target is to hit 10K subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing and don't forget to press bell icon. I'm Alara Hawthorne, and for most of my life, I believed that staying silent was the only way to survive in my family. We lived in a townhome in Portland that looked pristine from the outside. Tidy hedges, freshly painted trim, flowers in perfectly aligned pots. But inside, the air felt clipped, like every breath had to be earned. My mother, Lorraine, ran the household like a CEO ran a corporation. Everything polished, everything in order. My father, Victor, stayed in the background, believing peace meant never choosing sides. And my sister, Sienna, the golden child, was given privileges I was never offered. I learned quickly that my voice was a problem. At dinner, Sienna would chatter about art shows or volunteer projects, and my parents' faces would glow with pride. If I tried to speak, the mood would stiffen. Mom would frown, Dad would glance at his watch, and conversation moved on as if I didn't exist. By the time I was 16, I had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandmother, Mabel. She smelled of roses and old paper, and listening to her felt like the world paused. With her, I wasn't dramatic, invisible, or difficult. I was simply Alara. Weekends spent at her small house, watering her plants, baking her experimental cookies, were the only times I felt grounded. "You're stronger than they realize," she'd say, pressing her hand over mine. Those words stayed with me for years. But my family never noticed my milestones. I remember my 18th birthday. Sienna had a scholarship art show that weekend. The house was plastered with posters and glitter celebrating her. I sat quietly, telling myself it didn't matter. Mabel, of course, remembered. She always did. When I got accepted into college, I left the letter on the kitchen counter for my parents to find. By the next morning, it had vanished. Lorraine never mentioned it. Victor said nothing. I called admissions myself to confirm the acceptance. Back then, I told myself these were small things. Families forget sometimes. But the truth is, there's a danger in normalizing harm. Over time, you stop noticing you're being erased. And years later, when the past clawed back into my life, I realized someone had been paying attention all along. It began on a quiet Wednesday evening, the type of night where the world feels stable enough to forget old wounds. I had just returned from a long day at my graphic design studio, kicked off my shoes, and was sipping tea when the mail caught my eye. Bills, a flyer, a charity envelope, and then one that froze me mid-sip, a legal notice. It demanded my presence in a Portland courtroom for a defamation case. Sienna Hawthorne Collins versus Rowan Brooks. I froze. I hadn't spoken to my sister or either parent in nearly 4 years. Portland had been my sanctuary. Now, the law was pulling me back into the orbit of people I'd spent half my life avoiding. My heart hammered. I didn't know this Rowan Brooks. I didn't know what Sienna had done. But some old, bruised instinct started gnawing at me. That night, I did something I hadn't allowed myself in years. I looked up Sienna online. Her blog appeared immediately. A story about a small business fraud case she had been embroiled in, client accounts misused, financial misconduct, normal corporate chaos, until I reached the final paragraph. She has a pattern. The text read, "Ask her sister about the incident in the kitchen, why their family worked for years to make sure no one believed her, and why every milestone was erased. My breath caught. I reread it 3 times. No stranger should know that day, that smirk, that inhaler just out of reach. No one should have known about the years my accomplishments were ignored, the memories rewritten. And yet, someone did. Fragments of my past resurfaced like flotsam after a storm. My grandmother calling one night, confused that I hadn't replied when I had left 3 messages that week. The disappearance of my college acceptance letter. Birthday cards returned unopened. Relatives forgetting I existed altogether. For 19 years, I had blamed myself. Maybe I was oversensitive. Maybe I remembered incorrectly. Maybe families just acted this way. But the line in Sienna's blog was a match struck in a dark room. I picked up my phone to call a lawyer, thinking about avoiding testifying. And then I paused. My family had spent decades silencing me. What would happen if I finally used my voice? I closed my legal pad and opened my laptop, typing a name I hadn't touched in years, Maris Sterling. In high school, Maris had been quiet, always keeping her second-hand laptop close, avoiding the popular crowd that orbited my sister. She'd been bullied, ostracized, and ignored. I wasn't strong enough to protect her then, but I'd sat with her at lunch when no one else would. Years later, Maris became a digital forensic specialist. She pieced together erased emails, recovered deleted messages, and followed digital breadcrumbs most people thought were gone forever. When I called, she didn't hesitate. "Bring everything you have," she said. "If they try to erase you, we'll unerase you." 2 days later, I stepped into her small office. Screens hummed softly, glowing lines of code reflecting in her glasses. Shelves were stacked with external drives, processors, and evidence boxes. A place where truth didn't disappear, just because someone wanted it buried. I pulled out a thin, handwritten folder I'd kept since leaving home. Sienna's journal entries, early family emails, and old financial statements. My hands trembled slightly as Maris slid them into her system. "Let's see what they tried to hide," she murmured. Within minutes, files appeared. Emails between Lorraine and Sienna, spanning years, detailing strategies to erase me from birthdays, college milestones, and even financial accounts. I sat, silent, as the story of my life unfolded in digital ink. The smirks, the manipulation, the careful rewriting of my history, it wasn't neglect. It was deliberate. Maris looked at me and said quietly, "Ilera, you're not the one who should be afraid anymore." And for the first time in decades, I believed her. The morning of the hearing felt surreal, as if I'd stepped into someone else's life. Portland's courthouse rose in stark, clean lines of concrete and glass, reflecting a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or shine. I tightened my coat around my shoulders, the spring air sharp against my skin, and walked through the doors. Every step echoed with a truth I had spent nearly 2 decades convincing myself wasn't real. Inside, the courtroom buzzed softly, papers shuffled, whispers floated, the scrape of chairs across the polished floor. Sienna sat near the defense table with her attorney. She looked composed, her usual practiced poise in place, but I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands. She had become the first person in years to speak my truth without even realizing it. And then the doors opened. Lorraine entered first, her steps measured, face calm but eyes calculating. Victor followed, quietly, hands tucked into his pockets. Finally, Sienna rose and walked toward the stand. Her expression was polished, perfect, but her aura radiated entitlement. She looked as though the courtroom existed solely for her to perform in. The judge entered, and silence fell immediately. "Court is now in session," she announced. "We will begin with the plaintiff's testimony." Sienna's voice was steady as she spoke about her business, the alleged betrayal, and the financial damages she claimed I had caused. Every sentence was measured, rehearsed, a tower of half-truths designed to shield her reputation. But then her attorney delivered the line that I'd been waiting for. Your Honor, the plaintiff asserts these allegations stem from her sister's unstable history. The courtroom shifted. I had expected this tactic. They would try to use me as the evidence of instability, the living proof of my past trauma. Miss Hawthorne, the court acknowledges your presence. The judge said, you are listed as a witness. Please approach. My pulse hammered as I stood. But Maris had prepared me. Truth doesn't need theatrics. It only needs light. Sienna's attorney began immediately. Miss Hawthorne, is it true that you have been estranged from your family for several years? Yes, I answered calmly. And would you say your recollections may be influenced by emotional distress or unresolved family issues? No, I said steadily. My recollections are influenced solely by what actually happened. He smirked. Isn't it true your family expressed concern about your mental stability when you were younger? They expressed it behind my back, never to me, and without any professional assessment. It was not concern, it was a tactic, I said. A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Your Honor, my attorney interjected, the defense wishes to introduce documents authenticated by a certified digital forensic specialist. The judge nodded. Maris approached the screen. With a few keystrokes, she displayed the first email, Lorraine to Sienna. Delete the video and don't mention it to Grandma. We need to maintain appearances. Gasps echoed across the room. Sienna flinched. That's out of context, she snapped, but her voice lacked authority. Maris clicked again. Sienna. Abigail refused to come downstairs again. Lorraine said, that's perfect. Keep it up. I felt a strange weight lift off my shoulders. Every hidden manipulation, every erased milestone, every gaslight moment. Evidence now spoke louder than anyone could deny. Then came the family video I had kept hidden for years. The screen flickered to life. 17-year-old me, on the floor, gasping for air, fingers stretched toward the inhaler. Sienna stood over me, smirking, holding the inhaler just out of reach. Lorraine and Victor sat frozen, watching silently. The room was silent, as if everyone collectively held their breath. Sienna's voice on the video rang through the speakers. Pathetic. The gallery covered their mouths. Even Victor closed his eyes, shame radiating from him like heat. Lorraine remained motionless, cold. Maris whispered, there's more. And she played the emails spanning years, each detailing how my achievements, my milestones, my very identity had been manipulated, erased, or repurposed to elevate Sienna. I straightened, wiped my tears, and felt a surge of resolve. This wasn't just evidence. It was the story of my survival. And finally, it had witnesses. Before we proceed, the judge said, let us review a crucial piece of evidence. The lights dimmed slightly as the emails and videos played, one by one. Each document, each time-stamped message, exposed a deliberate, long-term pattern of manipulation and exploitation. Sienna's financial exploitation surfaced. She had used my identity to secure an educational loan I never knew existed, siphoning funds from accounts under my name. The courtroom gasped again. Sienna's attorney stammered, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The pattern was undeniable. I wasn't the unstable sibling. They had been orchestrating a narrative to control, erase, and exploit me. When the presentation ended, the judge leaned back. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear there was a long-term pattern of psychological manipulation and financial exploitation. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed. Appropriate civil remedies for the documented misconduct will be pursued separately. Sienna collapsed into her chair. Mascara streaked across her cheeks. Disbelief and panic etched in her expression. Lorraine sat motionless, stunned. Victor exhaled, the weight of years finally settling on him. I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in decades, I could breathe without bracing for impact. I didn't need permission to exist, to claim my identity, or to assert my boundaries. Later, outside the courthouse, Maris handed me a folder containing all the recovered documents. "This is yours now," she said. "Everything they tried to erase, you get to keep." I walked into the crisp Portland air, the spring sun hitting my face. My steps were light, deliberate. For years, my family had tried to control me through silence, fear, and erasure. Now, the truth had reclaimed its space, and with it, I reclaimed mine. I contacted a financial attorney to undo Sienna's misappropriations. The loans were canceled, and funds returned. The civil case that followed ensured Sienna could no longer misuse my identity or accounts. My parents begrudgingly had to acknowledge boundaries for the first time. I finally felt what it meant to be untouchable, not because of wealth or power, but because truth and preparation had created a barrier no one could penetrate. I also established the Hawthorne Survivor Fund, dedicated to helping young adults reclaim financial and emotional independence from toxic family environments. It felt like passing forward the strength my grandmother had instilled in me, the only voice that had believed in me when no one else would. Sometimes freedom doesn't come from confrontation alone. It comes from preparation, evidence, and unwavering belief in your own worth. For the first time, I could look forward to life on my terms. After the courthouse, I finally felt the fragile thrill of control returning. But reclaiming my life wasn't just about evidence, lawyers, or courtrooms. It was about every quiet, invisible part of myself that had been denied for decades. My apartment in Portland became my sanctuary, a physical space where every corner reflected choices I made for me and no one else. Every morning, I brewed coffee without fear, organized my bookshelves the way I wanted, and left my windows open to let the city's hum remind me I existed independently. The legal battles were far from over, but with the digital evidence, the emails, and the family video, the tide had turned. Sienna had no power over my life, nor did Lorraine or Victor. Each meeting with the financial attorney peeled back the layers of exploitation. Student loans in my name were reversed, funds returned, and restrictions placed to prevent further misuse. Even small victories, like reclaiming my old credit account, felt like milestones I had been denied as a teenager. I took the next step carefully, strategically. I wanted to ensure my family would finally understand boundaries, not through lectures, but through undeniable consequences. Sienna had grown accustomed to bending the world to her will. Now, the world would bend back, but in the form of systems she could no longer manipulate. I contacted her bank, the educational institution, and the credit reporting agency, providing full documentation of her fraud and misappropriation. Within weeks, she faced restrictions, repayments, and formal reprimands. The shock was almost poetic. A life built on entitlement suddenly met with accountability she could not charm her way out of. Lorraine and Victor were slower to react, wrapped in disbelief, guilt, and the faint panic of realizing their complicity. I sent each of them a formal notice. Any further attempts to access my accounts, finances, or personal correspondence would be treated legally as harassment. The language was clinical, calm, unwavering. For the first time, my parents could not manipulate, guilt, or gaslight me. They were restrained by the law, their own misdeeds documented for posterity. In parallel, I dedicated myself to helping others. The Hawthorne Survivor Fund became a project I poured my heart into. I worked with young adults who had experienced family manipulation, financial exploitation, or psychological abuse. I helped them create boundaries, recover their identities, and, where needed, reclaim resources taken from them. Every success story felt like a small personal victory, a ripple of justice extending beyond my own life. But the most unexpected part of the journey was confronting the emotional residue. Even with legal victory, I carried scars, lingering guilt, years of self-doubt, and the faint fear that someone could still undo what I had rebuilt. Therapy became a daily ritual, a place to untangle memories and articulate the silent betrayals I had endured. My therapist often reminded me, Abigail, the goal isn't revenge, it's reclaiming yourself. And slowly I understood. The revenge I orchestrated wasn't about humiliation or retribution. It was about claiming the life and identity that had been stolen. One afternoon, I received a letter from Sienna. I hesitated, knowing her words could still carry manipulative undertones. With steady hands, I opened it. Abigail, I never realized the damage I caused. I thought I was protecting you, helping you, but I see now it was only about me. I cannot undo what I did, and I will not ask for forgiveness. I only hope you are finally able to live without the shadow of my mistakes. Her tone was oddly sincere. I folded the letter, my chest tight but calm. I didn't need acknowledgement or remorse to feel justified. What mattered was that I had created a space for myself, emotionally, financially, and psychologically, that no one could trespass again. Weeks later, I met with Maris, my digital forensic ally, over coffee in a quiet downtown cafe. It's done, she said simply. The evidence is documented, the cases are closed, and they can't undo what you've reclaimed. I nodded, stirring my latte. It feels strange, peaceful, like finally breathing without expecting an ambush every time the door opens. Maris smiled. That's because you earned it, not by being invisible, not by staying quiet, but by asserting your reality. They wanted a narrative, they lost it. In the evenings, I would sit by my windows, watching Portland's skyline blur in the rain. I thought about my grandmother, Margaret, who had always seen me, believed in me, and reminded me I mattered. I realized my life had finally aligned with her wisdom. Visibility wasn't about being noticed by everyone. It was about acknowledging your own existence, your own worth, and refusing to let anyone erase it. Even family contact became healthier. My parents reached out, occasionally, carefully, within boundaries I dictated. I responded with measured kindness, aware that forgiveness wasn't about absolving their actions, but about freeing myself from lingering bitterness. I no longer needed to justify my experiences or seek validation. My life, my apartment, my finances, all were mine. The civil and financial consequences Sienna faced rippled outward. Her professional life fractured as colleagues learned about the misappropriations. She could no longer hide behind charm or manipulation. Her credibility, once her greatest asset, crumbled. Lorraine faced quiet ostracization within the social circles she had relied upon for influence. Victor retreated, humbled, and for once, I felt a sense of poetic justice. This wasn't maliciousness, it was balance restored. Months later, I stood at a fundraising event for the Hawthorne Survivor Fund. Young adults shared their stories, tales of manipulation, erased milestones, and regained independence. Each story resonated with mine, a symphony of resilience. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about reclaiming my own life, it was about empowering others to reclaim theirs. I found joy in the ordinary again, cooking dinner without fear of interference, hosting small gatherings, walking the streets of Portland without anxiety. The simple act of living, uninterrupted, became a revolutionary gesture. I had proven to myself that survival wasn't enough. Thriving was possible. Reflecting on everything, I knew this was the ultimate lesson. Family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by those who see you, respect you, and allow you to exist fully. Those who attempt to erase you, exploit you, or manipulate you may share DNA, but they do not define your worth. Your boundaries, your voice, and your choices are sacred, and protecting them is the ultimate act of self-respect. I sent a final letter to my parents and Sienna. I am reclaiming my life, my identity, and my peace. You may exist in it only where I allow on my terms. Respect that, and our interactions can exist. Cross it, and you will meet the consequences you once imposed on me. That letter felt like a declaration, the last line of a chapter that had begun with years of silence and manipulation. And in the quiet that followed, I breathed freely, not because my lungs were stronger, but because the truth had reclaimed its space. Not because I had won in court, but because I had won over the narrative of my life. Every memory, every boundary, every stolen moment, I had reclaimed them all. For anyone watching, reading, or listening, your voice matters. Your identity matters. Even if the people closest to you attempt to erase you, manipulate you, or diminish your worth, there is a path to reclaiming yourself. It is not simple, it is not easy, but it is possible. I finally understood. Survival is just the beginning. Thriving, unapologetically, is the real victory.